G'day ladies and gents, and welcome back to DCS World with Mags, and welcome aboard the F-16 Fighting Falcon, better known to most of us as the Viper. So at this point, the module has been out for about 2 days, and as such, this is not a review. I know I keep saying that, but I really have to drive this point home. This is my first impressions, my opinion of the module, in its current state. I don't do reviews on aircraft unless they're finished, which is why reviews are so few and far between in DCS. Unfortunately, the early access bug has bitten deep in DCS land, and it feels like more than half the airframes available are in early access. And the F-16 is no different, and my impression is... honestly, I'm disappointed. Look, let's be nice and clear here. It's not awful. It's not great, but it's not awful. I've been having a hell of a lot of fun with it. I actually think it's almost impossible to not have fun flying the Viper around, and providing you stay within the two narrow lines that represent the edges of the Viper's current development, everything is perfectly fine. The problem starts once you step outside of those lines. To explain what I mean, my first flight in the Viper was on Carcassus. No combat planned at all, just take off and go and play silly buggers in the mountains to get a feel for the aircraft, and it was fantastic. She flies like an arrow, rolls perfectly on a center axis, and is entirely predictable. Almost immediately I was happy to put her right on the treetops. The cockpit view is incredible, even without VR, and while sadly my own VR is currently out of commission, so I couldn't check for myself, I have spoken to several people that I know and trust that do almost exclusively fly in VR, and they've said that it is one of the best VR experiences in DCS at this time. Not only is the view amazing, but the cockpit seems to have been designed with VR in mind, so the gauges and the HUD, particularly on newer VR models, are extremely easy to read, which is one of the big complaints about the early generation VRs on some of the older aircraft in DCS. And then there's landing, and you guys know what I'm like with landing. Getting a 100% perfect landing is probably going to require a little bit of practice, but getting a landing that is entirely acceptable and completely within the boundaries of the aircraft, not a problem at all. The Viper maintains speed better than the Hornet does, so it requires less throttle manipulation in order to keep yourself on speed and keep your descent smooth. And while I was being a little heavy-handed here, you can see it's not difficult to keep the indicator inside of the E-bracket and just to keep the plane coming down within acceptable margins. Probably a little heavy on the touchdown. And as I understand it on the F-16s, you actually want to try and sit on the back wheels for a little bit and let the underside of the aircraft act as a bit of an air brake to pull you up. But that recording was only my second time ever putting her down, so as you can see, it's not hard. So up until this point we've been going very well, so now it's time to get into air-to-air combat, and unfortunately this is the point where you will start running into things that will begin to pull you out of the sim. So going through the easy stuff, flying the F-16 is a dream in air-to-air combat, as you would imagine. It is maneuverable as all hell. Slow fighting MiGs and SUs is easy, high-speed engagements. It's wonderful. It is just a beautiful aircraft to dogfight in all round. I mean, just watch this. When even the AI can't cheat themselves out of an engagement, you know the plane's good. But this is when you're on the winning side and you're the one firing the shots. Everything is perfectly fine, up until the moment that you take a hit. See the problem? I tell you what, we'll run another one of these, see if we can spot it the second time. There's no damage modelling at all. Nothing comes off. Missile impacts of any kind. You can hit this thing with a Phoenix and it won't lose a flap. In fact, the only area where I've ever lost any component off the aircraft due to damage was actually the very first crash I ever had, where I got cocky and landed on a public road. And completely forgot that, unlike in X-Plane, the cars in DCS actually do have a collision model. Now, as funny as this was at the time, and as funny as I'm sure you're finding it now, it does show exactly the extent of the problem with the DCS damage model. As you can see, the undercarriage wasn't smashed off the aircraft, it wasn't bent or broken, it just disappeared on impact with the car. It's gone. There's no debris, there's no bending, there's no damage, it's just that entire left-hand side section of the undercarriage vanished. Now, while damage modelling may not be a particularly important part in most flight simulators, in particular, things like civilian commercial flight simulators, in a combat flight simulator, this is a major issue if you can't break the aircraft. In fact, you can just drive it straight through a fence. That's perfectly fine. Even without the undercarriage strapped onto the side, it will keep going until it eventually gets stuck, which is what's happened here. I've actually phased through the objects and can't move it forward. I also discovered something else when I did this. Now, I'm not 100% sure on the systems of the F-16, but the last time I checked, there was a safety so that when the aircraft was on the ground, its weapons couldn't be fired. Now, it could have been the quote-unquote damage here, but apparently that safety doesn't exist. I was able to fire the cannon, and then I was able to fire an AIM-9M, which hit a concrete fence and blew up my aircraft without actually doing any damage to my aircraft, obviously. And then you start running into other things. I like flying at night. I know it doesn't make for a great DCS video, but I like flying at night anyway. The external lights don't work on the Viper, so yeah, you can have the internal lights, cockpit lights work perfectly fine, but your externals don't appear to be hooked up at all. If you follow Wags' tutorials on how to operate the systems inside of the Viper, everything that he shows works perfectly fine, but the second you sort of step outside of those tutorials and start fishing through the MFDs to see what else you can find, you start running into placeholders or non-functional pages or systems that just don't seem to work right. In fact, that's actually probably a major part of the problem. You start running into so many little things that don't actually work that you start to question whether or not what is working is actually working correct or not. The current way of operating systems inside of the Viper. Is this how they're going to work from now and into the future, or is this just how they're working now because other parts of the avionics are not finished yet? I mean, we've had this a couple of times in the Hornet, where an existing system has been changed because another part of the avionics has come up and the operation has been corrected. The previous operation that you learnt was only a placeholder, so how much of the F-16 as we are flying it now is just a placeholder until other parts actually work? The Viper itself seems to fly the way I would expect the Viper to fly, but is this even the finished flight model? I don't know, and at this point, the state that the aircraft's in, I can't really trust that it is. I mean, in many ways, the F-16 as it currently stands feels very similar to what the F-14 did when I first got access to it. Keep in mind, I got access to the F-14 a couple of months before it went into early access. When I got access to it, the Rio pit was basically non-functional. None of the switches in the back seat actually worked, or most of them weren't hooked up with animations. If you wanted to access systems back there, you had to use keybinds. There was only placeholder textures, there was no external lighting either. There was a lot of stuff that was still being worked on. The Viper honestly feels like it's been released a couple of months before it should have been. It needed a couple of months extra in the oven just to bake in some of these systems to get some of the extra functionality sorted out. But it feels like it's been pushed out because, obviously, Eagle Dynamics has sort of a deadline and a schedule that they're trying to meet on their end, and they needed the Viper to roll out, and so it did. And I'm not sure it should have. That being said, I'm not swaying many opinions here. Everybody who is already in love with the Viper, which is a crap ton of people, just quietly, has already purchased it, and they're already flying it, and you've already experienced all this. Those that haven't purchased it were probably not going to pick it up at this stage in early access anyway. And in the long term, I think it's going to be a fantastic module. I'm not sure what the development speed is going to be on it. I'm hoping it'll develop faster than the F-18 did, because at this point we're over a year of early access in the F-18 and we're still ticking along. I'd like to see the Viper get along a little bit quicker than that, but in the end I do think that the F-16 will be great. I just think it's been rushed out the door a little bit too early, that's all. And as much fun as I've been having with it, it's difficult to not feel a little disappointed by that. Anyways, ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed the video and thank you very much for watching. As always, check the video description down below for links to my social media, my Twitch, my Discord, my Patreon if you'd like to help support the channel, and my Teespring store so you can check out my merch. I've got a whole bunch of non-YouTuber aviation-themed clothing that you may enjoy, and obviously, let me know in the comment section down below what has been your experience with the F-16 since you've picked it up. Or if you haven't picked it up, what's your opinions on what you've seen? If you've been flying against the F-16 on the multiplayer servers, how has it been to fight or fly alongside of, especially since it has no functioning IFF at this point in time? So, from what I hear on the multiplayer servers, blue on blue has been entirely common. Anyways guys, until next time, also remember to click that like button and that little notification bell thingy so YouTube actually tells you when a video is coming out, because they're terrible with that these days. Share this video and subscribe if you would like to see more and you haven't done so already. And until next time everybody, take care.